Next up, we get to talk about Little Richard, which I'm really excited about. Last week, we talked about rhythm and blues as a term, and how I was always a little perplexed about where rhythm and blues would be applied, especially in relation to rock and roll. So, for example, it's common to see even in textbooks, people maybe identify Elvis Presley as rock and roll, or Bill Haley and his Comets as rock and roll, whereas Little Richard and Fats Domino and even Chuck Berry might be labeled simply as rhythm and blues. And so musically, I've approached these and seen that there really is more in common between these artists than what separates them. And so asking the question of what makes Elvis and Bill Haley rock and roll, whereas Little Richard and Chuck Berry are rhythm and blues, really it comes down to the race of the artist itself. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a little suspicious of using the term rhythm and blues in this era, especially as opposed to rock and roll, trying to define what is not rock and roll. And so I'm pretty ambivalent about the question of whether Little Richard should be seen as rhythm and blues or rock and roll. And to me, Little Richard's contributions to rock and roll and influences really makes him deserving of the label. So Little Richard's full name is Richard Wayne Penniman, and he learned piano in his family's gospel troupe, the Penniman family. And he was influenced by diverse sources as much as Escarita and Marion Williams, who the latter being a gospel singer. And so his sort of famous hooping and hollering in his vocal style that he became known for was actually borrowed straight out of the Black Church through Marion Williams, this famous gospel singer. Now, in terms of his influence on rock and roll, Little Richard's main contribution was this driving rhythmic energy at the piano. This was done through straight eighth notes rather than the swung eighth notes of jazz and much of early blues or early rock and roll, including Elvis Presley. So the straight eighth notes would sound like da 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and like that, versus a swung rhythm which is dun dun da dun da dun 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 that has a triplet skeleton underlying it, da 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 da. The swung triplets the swung eighth notes tend to sound a little more laid back, dun dun da dun da da dun da da dun da dun. Whereas the eighth notes have more of a forward driving propulsion. Da 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 da. Now what's interesting, as you'll see in one of the documentaries, is that Little Richard based this sound on the sound of a train. When a train is moving, it's going cha 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 cha, and that's a sound that he wanted to incorporate into his music. Now Little Richard was openly gay, and that was an important part of his identity. Now, he was known for wearing makeup and striking, even flamboyant clothing in public and while performing, and I think his reasoning for this is really interesting. You'll hear about this in some of the documentaries that you'll watch later in the weekly schedule, but the reason that he adopted this style was so as not to be seen as a threat within the South where he was performing. So the question is, threat to what? Well, the answer to that is primarily a threat to white women. So there's a long history and a long archetype of black men and black masculinity being seen as a threat to white womanhood, to white femininity. So what Little Richard found as a strategy is that he could wear thick makeup and striking clothing, a lot of pink. He could wear his hair up, and as a result, he would be viewed as, I suppose, less masculine in the eyes of white men who might otherwise see him as a threat and take retaliation. And so he says in one of the documentaries that if he presented himself in this way, then the white venue owners and the white male attendees didn't feel as threatened if he had women that were fawning over him. And so as one of the videos mentions, this is an interesting strategy to be able to present rock and roll music in an environment that was very hostile towards signs of black identity, especially black masculinity. So this was a way of getting rock and roll music just integrated into the cultural stream without setting off red flags and pushback against the musical style. Little Richard referred to himself as the architect of rock and roll, not the one who built it from the ground up, but one who helped to design and structure the movement. He inspired artists as diverse as Otis Redding, Jimi Hendrix, James Brown, David Bowie, and the Beatles. So his influence is felt very strongly throughout rock and roll history. Now, throughout his life, as from his origins, Little Richard remained a deeply spiritual person. And so I think a couple times during his career, he takes a hiatus away from performing to become a minister or to become more involved in Christian spirituality. So I think that's another interesting feature to his biography that I encourage you to read up more on.